Good morning on the 22nd of March, 2024. The guess technically, I guess we could say second to last Friday of Lent 2024. Next Friday is Good Friday, and we had some technical issues this morning and a very late night here for us, so I opting to do this a couple hours later than normal. Uh Traditionalist Catholic. Yeah, spacemen in the thumbnail, going to be interesting. Yeah, yeah, you can thank my wife for that thumbnail, but you'll see why we're talking about this today. Good morning to Flying Tigers. Good morning to everybody who normally doesn't make this live stream, which is usually at 4 o'clock in the morning Central Time here in Oklahoma. Um, yes, the Vatican is allegedly preparing to inflict a new theology on the church because that is what we need right now. In order to bring souls to Christ, what we need is a new theology. Except when we get into this, you're going to see that bringing souls to Christ is not even on the list of reasons they might be doing this. So we're going to talk about this, and there's a good reason why it's a flying saucer on the thumbnail and all the rest of it, because we're getting into weird times, folks. Very, very weird time. Good morning to Teresa in Perth. Beautiful place if you've ever been. Um, yes, so we had a lively conversation in the live chat in the minutes leading up to this, but let's go into our main story today, which comes to us from, let me get my notes up here, comes to us from Il Giornale d'Italia. And you get this very odd story. Headline: Vatican, the new theology is coming. Let's make an addendum to that. The new theology is coming. You'll see why. Here is the exclusive text that is circulating confidentially among Jesuits, Dominicans, Franciscans, and Benedictines. And unfortunately, they claim they have the exclusive text, but as you see, they don't actually have the text. They just have an article and then some, because they're using some secular drivers for this, links to some impure ads below, which you can't really get past. I know, because I get complaints all the time about some of the ads that I can't control on my channel and on my podcast elsewhere. So we'll be careful here, but the Vatican is working on a new theology. And we're not surprised by this. This has been one of those things we've heard whispers about in the background. And we've gotten some hints at that anyway. I mean, you need a new theology, a different theology that's from the Catholic theology to explain fiducia supplicans. You need a new theology to explain Fratelli Tutti, which was a document issued by the Vatican after the Pan-Amazon Synod in late 2019. Yes, that same synod that saw the Pachamama debacle. You need a new theology to make heads or tails out of the Abu Dhabi Declaration on Universal Human Fraternity, this universal brotherhood stuff they're preaching. You need a new theology for all of that. And behind the scenes, Jesuits, Dominicans, Franciscans, and some others are working on this new theology. That's the story. So let's take a quick look here for some context. Quote: "We," meaning the authors of this article and the proprietors of this independent news website, "managed to obtain an exclusive draft of the document, which concerns what should be the key points of a new theology, which also seems to be inspired by Pope Bergoglio's encyclical Fratelli Tutti, but expanded to a cosmological version and vision. A text that is circulating confidentially among Jesuits, Dominicans, Franciscans, and Benedictines, and which also seems to follow Psalm 24 or 23 if you're using a Dewey Rams non-Protestantized version of the Bible, where it is written, quote, the earth and its contents, the universe and its inhabitants, often cited also by Monsignor Balducci. Could this be why the American government observers have begun to make research on UFOs official? Do they also prepare people for this revolutionary theological text? We live in a time of great change," end quote. Now, that's being understating the issue here. What they're alleging is you have the typical minds in the church you would expect to be working on a new theology text. I would put Cardinal Fernandez would have to be involved in this, working with outside influences. What the article goes on to describe is what we have to call around here the embedded or permanent government. That one which Vigano cites all the time and says is in union with a similar embedded church governance structure. He doesn't say embedded. He uses a different word to describe it. He uses the word deep to describe them. But if I do that in plain language, put that word with the other words he uses together, I get in trouble on this platform. I might already have just gotten in trouble for even invoking that word. So we'll see. But I know it from experience. Anyway, the author goes on. He describes some odd movement in the secular world from the powers that shouldn't be that are aligning with this. All of that movement is pointing to a new division between East and West that hadn't overtly been seen since the fall of the Iron Curtain in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. And you have to have noticed this, that the political order internationally is sort of realigning itself, and it's starting to look suspiciously like the old one from when we were, most of us were kids or young people. Like it's like we're traveling back into the bad old days of the 1980s in that way. This new demarcation is going to include the church as an apparatus in this division. It's something to consider as the church quietly prepares itself for a conclave to choose the next pope, by the way, even if Francis is around for another couple of years, because that demarcation, that division of the general order of things, and that mobilization by secular authorities wielding influence over the church, because that's what's being alleged here, that those outside forces are influencing this development of a new theology. And this is not the first time we've heard this, by the way. They will not allow, under any circumstances, the church to fall into the hands of a pontiff who will not play along with the movements of these authorities. The author of this piece doesn't say that himself, but I'm saying that. And I'm going to give you a good example of this that will make some people very uncomfortable. I wish I had this link to bring up to you. You've heard about Francis's, we'll call them white flag comments recently. That caused a lot of consternation. There are people in the traditional world who are all over the board on that conflict in Eastern Europe. All over the board on it. Cardinal Mueller came down specifically on the side that my own government is on and suggested to Francis that he reiterate or reframe his message on that. That was surprising to see coming from Cardinal Mueller, until I remember that Cardinal Mueller is actually kind of a moderate. He's kind of moderate-ish. Well, he's friends with Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church in that way that some people can be friends with people that they are trying to bring over to the side of good, right? Well, that's kind of what we see here. There's a long history of this sort of outside influence from the secular authorities in government, and we don't need to, or in the church, and we don't need to we're not even talking about here weird conferences going on at the Vatican with Francis and others. We're talking about things that go all the way back to the conclave that gave the church Pope John the 23rd. It's long been alleged that they were deeply involved in that, trying to influence things from outside. We know that Vatican II, just a couple of years later, was deeply influenced by outside forces, to the point where their observers there started calling it the Media Council, because the press was pushing on the church to do things. We know that there were people working behind the scenes to push the periti. Those are the experts. That then Father Ratzinger was one such periti. Joseph Ratzinger worked as the assistant to Cardinal Bea at the council. Cardinal Bea being one of the most notorious modernists there. And Ratzinger was a periti, one of the experts to assist the bishops and the cardinals there on directing Vatican II. We know that outside forces were influencing things there. It's been like this since at least 1945, probably going back further than that, but at the very least since that time, to the point where I actually kind of want to write a book on that subject if I can get the research together to show all the things we know and are alleged to know about that. It would be an interesting subject. But the point here is the result of this is an ongoing clash of East and West. They'll try to impose one vision of its rule, the broader system's rule over everyone, everywhere. And the Vatican is caught in the middle of this. And it's being essentially recruited to one side, and hence why they're promoting a new theology. This is abandoning the new theology of Teilhard de Chardin, or more likely evolving from that, building off of that to something even more diabolical. Because remember, they talked about a cosmological version of theology that would replace this. So we go back to the article. Quote, "This new theology will teach that we are not alone in the universe, that God is not an abstract being, but that he is the omni-creating intelligence, the energy that creates and the light that creates galaxies and solar systems. Therefore, the universe represents life, and terrestrial man is not the only interior of intelligence spirit. Indeed, the smallest atom to the largest galaxy, they are all living beings. Suns, galaxies, planets are alive and possess an intelligence, which has at times incarnated in man to speak to men and help them in their evolution. The new theology, or the new theology, will eliminate rites and the exaltation of religious concepts. They will be replaced by teaching concepts that will have to be put into practice directly in every manifestation of daily life. Furthermore, it explains that the universe is the paradise of creation, and hell is everything negative that man chooses by virtue of his free will. That purgatory is nothing other than the purification of the effects resulting from causes generated by man. The new theology will explain that man is intelligent, that his spirit is eternal, that there is an eternal spiritual realm, and that our passing does not exist, that life is eternal, and that the spirit evolves through the process of reincarnations. For this reason, the intelligences that live and develop in the universe are all brothers and sisters of us who live on this planet, because we all, us and them, possess the spirit. The new theology will not be divided between religions, but will unite all the races of this planet in an agreement of brotherhood. And for thus, it is essential that in the final phase of this century, we become aware of the fundamental reality, which shows us that we are not alone in the universe, that divine intelligence creates human life and spiritual life in other crises, or in other galaxies rather. That contact with other civilizations would reverse the crisis situation of this planet of ours and would project humanity towards the establishment of a super civilization, without catastrophes and without profound crises. The change will have to occur by law of evolution. Other beings descended from the stars or from evolved worlds will be sent by cosmic intelligence to help human evolution. Christ is the top or peak of this pyramid of evolved beings. Religion is one. The message is one and contains the absolute truth, which is the original content of all the messages that have been given to man throughout the history of this humanity. End quote. What this article is alleging is that the false theology of Antichrist is being developed right now, with modernist theologians involved in the Vatican. And this will overtly replace the one true religion. This has been prophesied for some time. It would be the last, probably final step before the ape of the church is formally born. It would essentially probably be an end to this sort of overt ambiguity if this were imposed on everybody. Why? Because part of the nature of the ambiguity that we get from the Vatican is this attempt to reconcile what came before in the faith with this new set of ideas they're pushing. They're always in conflict. That's why that's at the core of so many traditionalist and non-traditionalist debates going on. Is, well, we can point to what doctors of the church said all the way back to antiquity. We can point to what the church said at various councils. We can point to popes and what they said, and then it conflicts with the new things. And so a lot of people just say, well, just go with what the new things are. After all, the magisterium said it, and it's Holy Spirit breathed, and yada yada yada. Right? That's your source of your conflict. Here, you will not have ambiguity anymore. It will be a clean break. How they're going to really justify this, I couldn't tell you. Probably crisis situation. That's usually how this goes. But this will be the final step before the ape of the church is almost certainly formally born. I know for some people, they'll say, well, the ape of the church was born at Vatican II. I'm like, no, this has been a process for some time. Let's see what else they have to say here, though. Brace yourselves for this quote. The new theology will espouse science, and they will be one. The scientist will develop technological processes for the benefit of the whole society, based on the law of the spirit, while the religious person will develop spiritual philosophy and its concepts that will merge with the development of technology. Let's pause here. You already kind of see that with the inclusion of secular authorities who absolutely have values that conflict with the faith, working in various pontifical academies related to science, including life, social sciences, some other as well. Thus, the new theology will teach that we are the one thing with the being that lives outside of us, soul and energy, that imbues us with its creating and life-giving light. This light is God, love and justice, omniscient and omnipotent, light from which everything begins and to which everything returns. God. It will therefore be taught that the universes, multiple, are the vital organs of this cosmic being, while solar systems and planets are the cells of its body and their humanities. Of solar systems and planets are its enzymes, which must elaborate and coordinate life on the cell. The cosmic being, or macrocosm, there are, as in our body, which is a microcosm, antibodies, which are highly evolved beings, which know and obey the divine law, and for this reason can circulate freely in it and process what is necessary for it and eliminate what is harmful. No enzyme foreign to the cell is allowed to enter it if the former constitutes danger to the latter. In fact, even the cells of the cosmic being are equipped with their self-defenses, and these are the four primordial elements of creation: fire, air, water, and earth, but also with self-destruction if necessary to admonish the man. It has been said, what is below is similar to what is above. And again, know yourself and you will know God. This is the concept of the new theology. End quote. It's the ultimate form of man-centeredness. Know yourself and you will know God. That's what's coming. And we can go here, give you an example of how this is already sort of here already by going and checking in with our good friends over at Novus Ordo Watch, who have this fun story for us. Headline: Novus Ordo priest denies Christ's atonement. Jesus did not give everything to appease an angry God. That's a rejecting basic, the most basic Lenten theology from a priest at the Ambo. When you see some of the details of this, it's just brazen. Modernism is the synthesis of all heresies. And here we get the kumbaya group hug version of modernism, because there are other versions of it out there. This is the easiest one for us to pick apart, because when more conservative and moderate figures in the church, from bishops or priests, who we often like when they say Catholic sounding things, when they start saying modernist things, people will tend to defend them more often. So it's easier to pick apart stuff that priests like this say. Here's what he has to say. Or here's what the article says anyway. Now, as a disclaimer, Novus Ordo Watch is a Sedevacantist outlet. No, I'm not a Sedevacantist, but I also don't have any problem with Sedevacantists as a general rule. Just I disagree with their final conclusions on the state of the church. Anyway, from their article, quote, "It's Lent even in the Vatican II religion. While it is a noble thing to do without such things as candy and entertainment during this sacred season of penance, a lot would be accomplished if Novus Ordo presbyters could at least give up heresy for Lent. Not so the Reverend Terence W. Klein, pictured above. Former associate professor of theology at Fordham University, he's the author of the book Vanity Faith, Searching for Spirituality Among the Stars." Searching for faith among the stars, okay? See how this all connects? And now serves at a parish in Ellenwood, Kansas, part of the Diocese of Dodge City. On March 6, 2024, the post-Catholic Jesuit rag America published a homily by Reverend Klein for the fourth Sunday of Lent. The title alone is heretical. Jesus did not sacrifice himself to appease an angry God. In this homily, quote-unquote, Father Klein responds to a woman who contacted him because she was upset about something he had said in a prior sermon, namely, quote, "What God would not ultimately ask of us, God freely gives. The Father sacrifices his Son, his only Son, the one whom he loves." That was enough to make the lady object. So says the lady, "I would love to see you address the awful atonement issue. Jesus did not give everything to appease an angry God, nor through his afflictions and horrible expiration to atone for sin, unless the Father is just that vicious." In response, the Reverend Klein scandalously agrees with the basic intention of his objector. My correspondent rightly rejects the notion of God the Father angrily demanding the self-sacrifice of God the Son. She is quite right. Jesus did not die to appease an angry God, but I would still leave my words as they were. Lord have mercy. End quote. Now, Novus Ordo Watch links this to the last time we were given a new theology, which was the diabolical work of Teilhard de Chardin, inflicted upon the Church at Vatican II with, yes, every single one of the post-conciliar popes, including the ones you like, speaking praises of that likely fully involuntarily possessed Jesuit. I've covered Chardin before. Go read his account of The Thing, or go listen to his what he called The Thing on my recording of it. He wrote that himself, and it sounds like he voluntarily allowed himself to be the subject of demonic possession. And this was before he started writing weird theology that he inflicted on the church. And this would include, this was at the time where he was doing some really weird archaeological work that the secular world sings his praises for, despite all of his work in that area being exposed as fake. They still sing his praises for it. He's kind of the source of the concept of the cosmological Christ, to bring it back to this new theology that they're pushing on us, that they want a cosmological version and vision to replace what we have now. And it's just going to build on Teilhard de Chardin. Again, I can't pronounce his name. I've tried. I can say it in my brain. I can't I can't pronounce it properly, no matter how hard I try, so you don't need to correct it. Here, let's take a look at what they have to say about the new theology, so you understand the fruits of this. Quote, what we see here is the rotten fruit of the nouveau theology, the new theology, which began to rear its ugly head in the 1930s. It was criticized by Pope Pius XII in various addresses in the 1940s, and many of its errors were condemned in the masterful encyclical letter Humanae Generis, the follow-up encyclical in the works but never completed. Yes, he was actually writing another anti-modernism encyclical before he passed away in 1958. A number of the proponents of the Nouveau Theologie, officially called ressourcement theology, were silenced and suspected of heresy by the Holy Office. Lamentably, however, these papal measures proved too weak, too ineffective to oppose a strong current. With Angelo Roncalli, Pope John the 23rd, taking over the Vatican in 1958, the floodgates were opened. Many of the new theologians were rehabilitated and became periti, theological expert advisors at the Second Vatican Council. Ever since then, ressourcement has been the Vatican's preferred theology, with undeniably disastrous results. One of the main errors of the new theology regards the relationship between the content of dogmas, by extension, other theological truths, and their expression, which goes in, Humanae Generis goes into that kind of complicated idea. It would seem that this issue, or some variation thereof, is part of what underlies Father Terence Klein's heretical claim that Christ did not die to appease God the Father, justly angered on account of our sins. Thus, the Reverend begins the explanatory part of his sermon with the following caveat, quoting his sermon. Like most theological statements, the truth of my words is not to be judged by correspondence. We cannot hold our words up to God for inspection. Instead, theological affirmations are judged primarily by coherence. How do they fit with everything else which we can rightly affirm of God? End quote. Although this may seem reasonable at first, what Klein asserts here is dangerous. It is true, of course, that when we speak about God, we are necessarily limited because God is infinite, and anything we could say about him is based upon merely finite concepts drawn from our created and finite world. Yet this does not mean that we cannot speak truthfully about God, that we have no way of knowing whether what we say corresponds to reality. One of the keys to understanding this can be found in St. Thomas Aquinas' Theology of Analogy, something endorsed by Klein himself toward the end of his homily. The Thomas philosopher Dr. Edward Feser provides a good example of it in his book on the existence of God, and then he gives you a long explanation from Dr. Edward Feser, whom I suggest you follow on Twitter if you're not. But we'll just skip past his explanation because it's long. We'll conclude here. He says, the lucid explanation by Dr. Feser allows us to understand that even though what we can say about God is necessarily limited by our human speech, and understanding by means of analogy, it is nevertheless said truly. When we affirm that God is love, for example, what we say is true, even though our own understanding of love is finite and subject to the limitations of our created mind. And when we say it's true, we mean that it corresponds to reality. God really is love, infinite love. End quote. Now, go back to what we were talking about when they talk about with that new theology, that when you know yourself, you'll know God. The entire point of this is to elevate man further to the level of God, essentially, to no longer acknowledge our own limits as created beings of finite wisdom and finite intelligence. To know yourself, you will know God. That is what the modernists are saying in what they're working on behind the scenes. Along the way, says, so glad to finally make a live. Okay, yeah, no, this morning I was running late because just had a very late night last night, no sleep, and then technical issues this morning. My camera wasn't working. Got it all worked out, though. Can I slow my speech? No, it's a generational thing. When I slow my speech, I get accused of droning on, and so can't help it. The complaints about droning on when I do slow down are 10-1 compared to this. So it's there's a gear icon you can click on to slow things down when I'm not live. But yes, this is, as Margaret says, diminishing the dogma. That's what it is. And it's not even diminishing the dogma, it's replacing it. Remember, most of the Catholic prophecy out there about the ape of the church, as I call it, which is a term I borrowed from Fulton Sheen and from a few others, is that that a false church would be built as an edifice over the Catholic Church, and that the Catholic Church would be attempting to dismantle it behind the scenes. And so the outside world would see the Catholic Church, but it would really not be that. They would be dismantling it behind the scenes outside the view of most people. They would fail in this task ultimately before essentially what is described by some of these mystics sounds suspiciously like the triumph of the Immaculate Heart and then the reign of peace. But that's what's happening. David Wilson says it's pantheistic Gnosticism. That's pretty much what it is, yes. But yes, that's what's going on here. That's what you should be watching out for. We've heard a lot about this new theology coming in the works from Vatican City, and I would keep an eye on it. The one thing, there's a couple of wild cards here with all this, though, and one is that Francis appears to not be much longer for this mortal coil. Next couple of years, maybe. So we'll see. We'll see how much time they have, because Francis has got 75% of the College of Cardinals are of his creation, but that doesn't mean everybody's on board with him either. All right, folks. How do I not get discouraged with all the corruption of the church? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in. Is there anything Elizabeth does not understand how they can change things of dogma? It's because they don't believe. It's because they're heretics. Heretics don't feel bound by these things. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in. If there's any final thoughts in the live chat, this is your time to get them in now. Otherwise, we are going to wrap it up. I do suggest you check out my news video for the day, which is more about Catholic prophecy. Pairs very well with this. I did not plan to put these two together until yesterday or the day before. But this is something to keep an eye on as things happen, because we've been hearing for a long time that they're working on a new theology. So it could very well this be the case, that this is what that is. Michael, again, be careful. You're starting to sound like you're a prophet, which is be very careful with that. Because if April 8th comes and goes and 40 days later comes and goes and your predictions are wrong, then you'll need to go to confession. So be very, very careful, okay? All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in. And as always, pray for the church. Anthony Stine, Ave Maria.